Hello, everybody, and welcome to the December Fic Night, which is our last Fic Night, obviously, of 2017, being that it is December 30th. This month, we are featuring a story that was actually written in December several years ago by our very own Shadowcat678. It's called A Christmas in Azkaban, and it centers around Sirius Black in his time in the famed Wizarding Jail, and some of the struggles that he goes through on one particular Christmas, both with guards at the facility, but primarily with his experience and kind of his the way that the time and everything that's happened to him that's wound up with him in Azkaban is affecting him, which as we all know from Dementors and from just the isolation itself and the trauma of the events, is a significant psychological weight on the character. So without further ado, I am going to do our usual live reading of A Christmas in Azkaban by Shadowcat678. And then we are fortunate enough to actually have Kat with us live for the broadcast, and she's going to answer some questions. As always, feel free to ask us additional questions in the group chat if you are viewing, or feel free to send questions in to the @HPFanficTalk Twitter, so that we can ask Kat your questions as well. All right, so let's get started on the story. Footsteps. People. Not the Dementors this time. A large black hound lay huddled in the shadows at the back corner of a cell, muzzle on paws. Wails of madness could be heard echoing through the prison's stone corridors. Cries of the hopeless, of the insane, of people so far gone it would be a stretch to even call them human anymore. By now, he'd learned to ignore them. Suddenly the dog twitched and began changing. Cracked paws slowly stretched into grime-covered hands and feet. Its spine lengthened out and straightened, and what was before a large black hound now sat the skeletal figure of a man, gaunt face sickeningly pale and wax-like. The prisoner shivered and tugged his tattered robes a bit tighter around him. It was dark, the blackness almost tangible, and so cold. Yet tonight it was even worse than usual, and Sirius Black was almost tempted to drag himself to the sorry excuse for a bed, to crawl under the coarse, itchy fabric that only just passed for a thin sheet, but only almost. He couldn't find the energy to move the few feet necessary if he tried. So he stayed, huddled against the wall, listening closely as the echoing steps drew ever closer. And here we are doing a routine patrol in Azkaban on Christmas Eve. We already have the warden stuck on this blasted rock. What's the point of us being trapped with him? I hear you. It's not like we could opt out. You know what? Sirius tuned the conversation out. Both male, probably young. He confirmed what he needed. They were definitely passing his cell, and soon. Sirius stared blankly at the wall opposite him, looking at the numerous jagged marks scratched into it, and let his mind slowly process the snatch of conversation he just overheard. Christmas. Had it already been another year? What did that make it then? 10 years, 11, 12, 20? Sirius didn't know, nor did he have the drive to try and remember. He'd lost count too long ago to spend any of his remaining energy trying. In Azkaban, time was all but lost. There was no point. He exhaled slowly, watching as his breath curled into a cloud of mist. The footsteps were coming closer now, slowing down, and then they stopped altogether. Sirius sighed and leaned his head back against the cold wall, knowing what was coming. He'd become used to it a long time ago. The countless looks shot at him from Azkaban's infrequent visitors, the taunts, how they laughed. Not that he really blamed them at this point. They didn't know. It was always the same. That wouldn't change just because tomorrow was Christmas. Well, if it isn't Sirius Black, it's not every day you're graced with the presence of you-know-who's second in command. Bet you're regretting what you did now, aren't you, you stinking git? Sirius turned his head to look out the metal bars, gray eyes landing on two men in their aura robes, wands lit to see through the dank darkness of the prison night. The man laughed and lightly kicked at the bars, but if he was looking for a reaction, he was sorely disappointed. It was just a game to them, and it was a game Sirius wasn't going to play. He'd learned. The sooner they grew bored, the sooner they'd leave. Sirius's eyes slid slowly over the two faces. They were new, quite possibly first-timers to the prison. He studied them, noting the lazy stances and inexperience that no long-timer would ever be caught showing. Neither one could have been half a day over 25. Complete amateurs. Even now he could see the slight shaking in their hands, the only outward sign they weren't as brave as they were trying to make themselves out to be. The Dementors weren't even on the same side of the island at the moment, not now that they had guests in their home. Sirius had seen much more experienced Aurors than those two walk by his cell's bars, swearing up and down never to enter through Azkaban's gates ever again. They'd be like that soon enough. He gave them 3 more hours before they cracked. Sirius inwardly laughed, but even in his head it came out as humorless and bitter. He had been even younger than they were when he started out as an Auror with James. Probably as naive, too, and just as prideful. It wasn't a kind reminder. So, did you hear the news, Black? Your dear old mum finally decided to kick the bucket last month. Heart attack or something of the like, wasn't it, John? The other Auror nodded, grinning. That's what the paper printed out. How's it feel being the last Black alive? Or half alive, at least. The man shot him a nasty smile, and when Sirius didn't respond, he snarled and kicked at the bars again, harder than last time. The unexpected change almost made him jump. The Auror wasn't smiling now, and the change happened so quickly Sirius almost wasn't sure it was the same person. His partner stood beside him, lips pressed together, but otherwise unreactive. Well, don't you have anything to say to that, or do you not care about her either? What does it matter that your last family died when you already murdered 2 of your so-called friends? The man sneered through the door, and Sirius fought the urge to wince. That one always hurt. Sirius continued to hold eye contact, watching as the Aurors still lit wands sent shadows shifting across the younger man's face. He wouldn't give them the satisfaction. John leaned back, every ounce of his earlier cockiness gone as he glared down at the man separated behind bars. You really are a heartless bastard. To think I used to look up to you. His eyes were no longer narrowed in anger, but disgust. Rick did nothing but shake his head behind him, lips still pursed together, like he knew something. John's voice decreased to a whisper, and his knuckles were white around his wand. You wouldn't remember if you saw him, but my older brother was only 1 year below you in your little group. He was a Gryffindor, too. He'd always tell me how different you were from your family, but you're just like the rest of them. And then he died. He died fighting you and those fucking Death Eaters. Got killed still thinking you were some kind of hero. That's why I became an Auror, joined to get rid of scum like you. You have no idea how many times I played out this conversation. But this, he shook his head. You're too pitiful to waste my time on. John turned his back and started off, but not before he hurled one last remark over his shoulder. I hope you die in this rat hole, Black. Do us all a favor. Rick watched as his partner walked by, then turned with just as much venom in his gaze. I told him he shouldn't have come. You didn't deserve the friends you betrayed. To think you used to be one of our best. How you got in, I'll never know. But what else could be expected coming from a family of pure-blood supremacists like yours? The young man smiled before starting off after his partner, sending a rude gesture his way. Rot in hell with your mother. I'm sure she'd enjoy the company. Then they were both gone, and Sirius turned away, listening as the booted footsteps that bounced off the halls faded away to nothing, leaving him alone in the darkness. In a way, he did deserve this, Sirius thought, and in a way, they were right. He might as well have been the real murderer. He shifted his weight, moving further back into the shadowy corner. Sirius might never have liked his family, but at least before he knew someone was still out there. He wanted to go back to Padfoot. It was so much easier to be a dog, but he couldn't. If they came back, they'd find out, and find some way to take it from him. And his animagus form was the last refuge he had. Sirius barely felt the frigid wall at his back past the numbness taking over his body. He gazed out at the thin chink of sky he could see through his cell's small window, watching the tiny white specks swirling down outside. It was such a change from the constant storms the island was known for. He was one of the few who had a window, which was both good and bad, he supposed. It helped to remind him there was still a world outside that hell, but at the same time, it only let in more cold. He closed his eyes, a few tears escaping now that no one could see. Instantly, he envisioned a candlelit table full of Christmas dinner, all the marauders gathered together around it at James's house, laughing as Lily chastised her new husband for setting off a dung bomb in the kitchen or some other thing of the like. It was their second Christmas after leaving Hogwarts, and he remembered fondly sitting around the crackling fireplace, with filled to the brim stockings hanging cheerfully on the mantel. He could see all the green and red decorations, the holly and enchanted mistletoe, and the hastily wrapped presents sitting there, just waiting to be torn open the next morning in the warmth of the Potter's firelit living room. For the shortest of seconds, he could have sworn it had gotten warmer as he thought about that Christmas Eve memory, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Peace, and maybe even the smallest spark of hope. Somehow, for the briefest of moments, Sirius could almost make himself believe he was back there, make himself believe that it was exactly how it used to be, exactly how it was supposed to be. He imagined telling all the wild stories from their Hogwarts glory days, sitting on the couch watching cheesy Muggle Christmas movies starring talking snowmen and red-nosed reindeer with Lily, and planning the next grand scheme with James, Peter, and Remus around the kitchen table the moment the fiery woman was out of earshot. Most of all, he imagined the laughter, the smiles, his friends. No, not just his friends. They were his family. It never mattered that none of them were related by blood. He'd made that family, his real family, all on his own. He remembered the time Lily got caught under enchanted mistletoe with Remus, and a small shadow of a grin found a way to his face, as he also remembered how James had almost punched his friend's teeth out for the peck on the lips he'd given the redhead to escape from under the charmed plant, and then the howling barks of laughter that came right after. They never did let James or Remus live that one down. Sirius smiled, the first real one in a very long time. Happy Christmas, mate. I miss you. Then Sirius was abruptly jerked back into reality, gray eyes shooting open in panic as he felt the cold, filthy stones beneath his numbing fingertips. Screams. Out of nowhere, an all too familiar chill shot up his spine, and he watched as frost crept under the iron door before slamming his eyes shut again, his hands clutching into shaking fists at his side and scraping against the stone floor as the room's temperature plummeted. The Dementors were coming. No, not yet. Damn you. It was too late. He felt the darkness grab at him, pulling and tugging like a living presence as the creatures, gliding like shadows down the dark, slime-covered corridors, grew ever closer. Sirius sucked in a sharp breath as he felt the coldness growing. Sirius screamed out as he tried desperately to cling on to the memories, to lock them away before they could be taken, to struggle against the visions. But he knew it was a pointless fight. It was always the same. Images changed, flashing through his mind as the brightly lit living room morphed into the blazing wreckage of the Potter's destroyed cottage, and the bright laughter of his best friend vanished, replaced by hazel eyes, glazed over and seeing out into nothing. He saw it as clearly as he first did that night, the 13 charred bodies lying still in the rubble and raw sewage covering the street. Heard Muggles screaming in terror as the man that he'd once called friend, family, vanished in the explosion. Then he heard his own mad laughter as he was chained, shackled, and dragged away. Anger. Sirius had been laughing, not crying, not screaming. Laughing. It was a bitter laugh, an angry one as he remembered all the times Wormtail, clueless, hopeless Peter, had screwed himself over. It was the first time he'd actually done something right, and yet it had been so very wrong. Even through the foggy numbness Azkaban brought, the memory of that night pierced him like a blade, twisting at his heart until every part of him blazed with agony. Somewhere in a faraway reality, he heard himself screaming, the metallic taste of blood rising in his mouth as his cries tore at his throat raw. He could remember it all, every single horrid detail. He had found them dead. He had felt the hard ground as he fell to his knees in the rubble. Then numbness, the anger. He knew James had changed Secret Keeper. Knew he changed it to him, to Peter. Sirius was the one who told him to. Vaguely, he remembered giving his motorbike to Hagrid, and could still hear his own deadpan voice as though from someplace far away. He'd known then, one way or another, it would end that night. It was all gone in that moment. All that he'd had, all that he'd wanted, vanished in one hellish second as cold reality struck. James and Lily were dead. Peter had caused it, had done it, Sirius was drowning, but no one could see. And it stopped, and Sirius went slack. The small spark of happiness he'd only just begun to experience, extinguishing like the flickering flames of Christmas candles as he slumped limply to the ground, shadows closing in around him once more. He welcomed the release with open arms. The hooded figures retreated from the prison cell as silently as they came, black cloaks bellowing as the iron door clanged shut. One more Christmas had come and gone, and one more moment of happiness was crushed by shadow. But somehow, Sirius would find it again. Someday he would find himself back around a brightly lit tree, laughing with people he'd give anything to protect. It wouldn't always be the same, and one day he would have a Merry Christmas after all. This is because hope, in the end, is like the flickering flame of a candle. It can always be put out, but it can also be relit. Somewhere, deep in the recesses of his mind, another small spark was slowly forming, just waiting for that last small push to ignite it into a raging flame. After all, it's in the shadows that flames shine brightest. Outside the small window, a single star broke through the overhanging clouds high above the gray stone fortress. A single force daring enough to shine through the cold Christmas Eve night. A single speck of light penetrating a sky full of darkness. The Dog Star. So that is A Christmas in Azkaban by Shadowcat 678. I will say one of the things that I really enjoyed most about the story was the vivid description of Azkaban. I think a lot of people write about Azkaban, write about Sirius in Azkaban, but there's not always the level of detail that's given about his actual environs, his cell, how he's dressed, and the conditions that prisoners are really left in there, even aside from the Dementors. I think part of that's kind of endemic to fan fiction because people already have sort of formed ideas from their experience with the films or with the books, or both, whichever they follow or hew to most closely. But a lot of people sort of take that for granted, so it was really refreshing to see that description actually played out in the story. Also enjoyed kind of the different take where they actually, there was a focus on how he and probably other prisoners who are similarly situated or who have had, falls from grace, so to say, are treated by the people that actually work at Azkaban, patrolling as needed, aside from the Dementors, and presumably to also keep the Dementors in line if necessary, and how they actually deal with the prisoners and Sirius in particular. And I thought that was a really interesting injection, as well as giving those people a backstory, so they weren't just generic taunters with names. They were actual people who had looked up to Sirius previously, and who, not knowing any different as the entire wizarding world didn't, and ultimately never really did for quite some time, that he actually was not the monster that he had been made out to be by Peter's betrayal. But without further ado, we do have Kat, as I said, live with us. And some of the questions she and I have talked about before, I'm going to ask them live, as we always do. And anybody who's watched Fic Night before knows that sometimes these little pieces that we get when we're answering the questions live, or having Matt answer your questions, some of these things generate offshoots or follow-up questions as well, and we'll try to address those things as they come up without going absolutely nuts and with your time this morning, afternoon, or wherever you are. So, Kat, the first question, we know this story was written in December, a bit shy of 10 days before, or a bit over, around 10 days before Christmas, the year you wrote it. But you'd also noted in your author's note that a big part of it was feeling sorry for Sirius, kind of reflecting on his experience at that time in connection with the holiday. When the idea for the story struck, which hit you first, the holiday or Sirius's plight?
Honestly, I don't remember, but since I did do it near the holidays, I'm pretty sure I was thinking about Christmas first. But if anybody's ever visited my fanfiction page, Sirius is kind of who I write about most. So honestly, I'm not sure. I can't remember.
What draws you to the character of Sirius so much, since he features a lot in your writing?
I think he's a very interesting and complex character, and I've always been drawn to characters with deep emotional kind of stories that I can explore. I feel like you can connect on a deeper level, and you can, when you write as a fanfiction writer, you have more to explore and expand upon for them as a person, and he's just so interesting in that aspect. He's had so many experiences that has shaped him, and I think that might be what draws me too. And also, I've grown up feeling kind of differently. Thankfully, I don't have a family like his, but I have been in a situation where I felt kind of like, my family's over here and I want a completely opposite direction, so that might be another thing.
Well, I think we can certainly all agree that I think Sirius is one of the more complex characters that we get in the story in terms of his experiences, and obviously his emotions, which end up running a wide range. Obviously, through his experiences that we don't necessarily get detail on in canon, but experiences that he has in the books as well. How long do you think a time in Azkaban it took him to reach this kind of point, emotionally and psychologically, where he is in the story?
I think it would be a gradual thing. He wouldn't be the same a year before as he is at this point. I think he lasted longer emotionally and mentally because he did have Padfoot when people weren't around to see it. And he had the knowledge that he was innocent to hold on to that others didn't. But it would kind of wear away, I think, a little bit at a time. Maybe within the first year or two, he would have stopped keeping track of how long it had been. After that, it would just go a little further and a little further each time. The only way he would really have to keep track after that is the occasional people who came by. It would just kind of blend together after a while. It's not one point, I don't think.
Sure. Well, bringing up the idea of him being wrongly accused, do you think there's something particular about his personality that helps that be sort of an anchor point for him, as opposed to something that leaves him even maybe more hopeless or embittered than he might otherwise be?
I think so. He's always, to me, been one of those people that he uses kind of this defiance as a shield. Defiance against his family, defiance when it comes to protecting Harry. It's different from a lot of the other characters and how they channel their anger. Harry was shown after the death of Sirius and Cedric to be a bit more explosive. Remus shut down. Snape became bitter. And Sirius, he always seems to have this kind of stubborn determination. And I think that's really kept him rooted. He doesn't want to give up. He's had his whole life, his family's followed them. Everyone expects him to be one way, and he's lived his entire life just defying that. And that defiance has just become a solid point of his personality, I think.
Well, aside from the glimpses that we see in canon of some of kind of what you've described, how do you think over the long term? How do you imagine that he would have been psychologically affected by the 12 years that he spent in the custody of the Ministry and the Dementors?
I think it would have highlighted a lot of his doubts. You have him dealing with the Dementors all the time, bringing up his worst memories, his family, all this other stuff, seeing his best friends killed. And you see him just, like, even in the books, some of it, but it's not really shown a lot. Again, he uses defiance as a shield, so I think he hides a lot of his insecurities. But I've always kind of felt like there's something underneath there. And it matches a lot of what you would see from people with PTSD, the self-blame, this kind of nagging fears in the back of your mind. What could I have done? All these little questions. And I think that could have really affected him. So, yeah. Hello? Think something happened. Okay then. Well,
we had a dropped connection there real quickly. So I will ask the.
I cannot hear. Okay.
I will ask you the last question again, which was. As I'd mentioned before, I've not seen an Azkaban fic that gives background or information about the folks that have to work at Azkaban. What specifically made you decide on these two characters and the connection that they had of sorts with Sirius?
Well, I always thought somebody had to check in besides the mentors, though nobody had been mentioned in canon. And besides a few people that would have been stationed there, like the warden, occasionally somebody would have to do inspection, make around. Although Christmas I just kind of picked because, I needed someone there. But I wanted to include characters who would have had a connection to Sirius in some way. He and James were both mentioned in canon to have been partners at one point in time after school. They were both the kind of people that would have been very obviously known at Hogwarts while they were there, the troublemakers, always being in the spotlight. And I think a lot of people would have looked up to them. So I wanted to include characters who would show that, who would have had some personal vendetta, I guess, against Sirius. Because I felt, like you mentioned, that it brought a kind of made it feel like they were real people instead of just there to talk to them, and that's kind of what I was going for with that. So basically that.
Well, this is the vast majority of the fic is obviously dealing with very dark emotions and an incredibly dark experience for Sirius. But you ended up choosing to end it on a fairly bright note with this sort of, I guess, it's not quite in the tradition of a vocalized soliloquy, but it's kind of like this silent soliloquy in Sirius's head about hope. What inspired you to include that and that type of ending?
I don't know. I guess it just felt right for the character at that point of time. And it was a Christmas fic, so I kind of wanted to at least end it on a lighter note. He would get a more hopeful time in the future. Things would get better, and like I mentioned in my end note, which you didn't read, but it's there if anyone wants to look at it. It's the time of year where people do think about that. It's almost the start of a new year, new things, new meanings, fresh starts. And I wanted to kind of end it like that, kind of as a reflection.
Well, two of the finest features of the story, at least in my opinion, one of which I already mentioned was the descriptions, but also the way that you capture emotions. Is there one of those that was more important to you in this story to emphasize? And is there one of those that you felt like was more of a battle to write?
I think with all my stories, I tend to focus on emotion the most. Description kind of highlights the emotion, but me personally, when I'm reading something, I want to feel a connection to what I'm reading. It can have an amazing story, it can have perfect grammar, but if I don't feel a connection, I don't see a point in reading it. And emotions are such a big part. Being able to see how they think, feel what they're feeling. Description just highlights that. And I think it's a lot harder for me, the description, because I've always had very intense emotions. So I'm able to write that easier. But descriptions, it changes depending on the moment in the story, the background, the air of it. Like there's all these little things you have to take into account. So it's a bit harder to get it correct. For me, might be different for other people, but for me.
Well, obviously, a lot of our community and people who will watch the video later are looking for guidance or help with their own writing. Some Some of us are obviously better at writing darker stories or angstier stories or fluffier stories, or various different kinds of writing that people feel more naturally inclined to and are better at. Do you have any advice for authors who maybe don't write the heavier subject matter a whole lot, but want to branch out into the heaviness and the kind of genre and feel that this story has?
I think you need to find a connection point. Darker stories that deal with this kind of subject matter often include the emotion I talked about, because that's what provides the impact, especially if it's character driven. In Introduction to Theater class, my freshman year of college, we were learning about method acting, and I try to include that a bit, trying to become the character, trying to get into the thoughts. But you need to be careful you're in a place where you can't be interrupted. Because for some people, I know for me, sometimes it can get kind of intense. As in, it can change your entire mood, and then you snap at someone, and then it's like, oh, what's going on? Oh, I'm writing fan fiction. But it is something that can affect you when you're writing more emotional pieces. And it makes you feel a deeper connection to what you're writing, but it can be a dangerous kind of approach if you have something like anxiety or depression or PTSD, or maybe it's on a subject matter that reminds you of something you went through. So if you're going to do that, don't be scared to take a step back. You need to monitor yourself and your emotional state and make sure you don't go too far into it, because I've done that before. It can sometimes not be as nice, but yeah, that's what I'd say.
Well, I will let folks watching and folks who view later know that Kat stepped up in a huge way to be here with us. We tried to slot this particular fic night in a way that some of the other times have not worked out for some of our international audience, particularly those kind of across the Pacific from both of us who are in the United States, and particularly our members in Australia, New Zealand, Japan, those kind of areas of the world. So we wanted to set this up at a time that might be convenient for them to watch or check in more quickly after it was done. So it is early morning for us, but it's even earlier morning for Kat where she is. And so we really appreciate you taking the time to answer the questions, be here with us on the live stream.
Yeah, it was fun. Well, my family didn't wake up.
Well, once again, we appreciate it. An excellent story. If you have not read A Christmas in Azkaban by Kat, she's Shadowcat678 on the archives at hpfanfictalk.com. I definitely encourage you to go read the story. I think if you celebrate Christmas or celebrate any of the kind of holidays going on in the holiday season, you can definitely still get that experience even more closely if you're still in that mindset, which I know Kwanzaa is still going on, but Hanukkah and Christmas kind of recently passed by, and I think people can still get close into the mindset even more of this being set in the holiday season. It's an excellent fic to read any time of year, just based off of the quality of the descriptions, characterization, and everything. But for those of us who joined us and those of us who will watch this video later, thank you very much for being here and for the last fic night of 2017. And we will catch you after we flip the calendar into January of 2018. I hope you all have a happy new year, and thanks for watching.